What is your favorite chocolate brand and, I don't know, your favorite type of chocolate?
Favorite chocolate brand, Tony's Chocolonely. Favorite chocolates, dark chocolate, because it's the only one I can eat as a vegan. How about you?
I forgot how sustainable you are, actually. But I also really like Tony's. I think they are a strong contender to be my favorite one. But I love a salted caramel. Like that little saltiness. It's really good. The reason that I'm asking you this very, I would say, invasive question is because I want you to assume that you're Tony's Chocolonely, right? You're a food company and you source cacao, but then you switch to a certified sustainable cacao. You actually pay the premium, you put it on your website. Does your scope 3 go down?
I mean, that's the whole point of buying certified, no?
Certainly not. And most people don't bother to even look into it.
Whoa. Maybe before getting into this whole certified cacao thing, maybe let's back it up first. So maybe I think something that most people generally don't know too much about is this whole topic of flag emissions, right? So SBTi introduced flag in 2022. So flag stands for forest, land, and agriculture emissions. And so it covers emissions tied to land use, farming, deforestation. And so globally, about 22% of the greenhouse gas emissions are these kind of flag emissions. And so for food companies, flag isn't exactly a footnote. It's often the majority of their entire scope 3 inventory.
Yeah. So it's not exactly a niche little add-on.
Not at all. It sits inside the existing structure, and mostly scope 3 category 1, the purchased goods and services. So when you're a chocolate company, this is your cacao farming in Ivory Coast, the land cleared, the soil disrupted, that's all flag emissions. For a dairy company, the methane from cattle, the land used for feed crops, flag emissions as well. And if you're a palm oil processor and you're converting peatland, this is all flag emissions as well.
Yeah. So then why did SBTi need a separate category for it? Why not just fold it into the existing targets?
Right, great question. Reason is because you can hit your general scope 3 target and still have a land use disaster hiding inside it. So the science for land sector decarbonization is fundamentally different from fossil fuels because carbon flows both ways, both in and out of soil, trees, and so on. So the target setting has to reflect that. You can't just apply the same methodology.
But then again, understanding flag is one thing, but getting the numbers is another, right? So where does the actual data problem come from?
Right, that's structural. So food companies, they don't buy from farms directly. They typically buy from commodity traders. So globally, there's actually 7 companies that control most of the world's trade in these forest risk commodities. So think about cacao, soy, palm, grain. And so first of all, ADM, Bunch, Cargill, and Louis Dreyfus, they're called the ABCD traders. They handle roughly 70% of the global grain trade. And then besides that, Olam, Wilmar, and Barry Callebaut, they do most of the trading for cacao and palm.
Yeah, so it's safe to say that they sit between millions of farmers and thousands of food brands.
Exactly. And so the traceability largely breaks at this point of aggregation, so at the silo or at the port. So a chocolate brand buying from one of these traders is buying from a company that sourced from potentially hundreds of thousands of farms and then blended all of this supply. So really farm level data mostly disappears.
Which means it's not really negligence, but that's just how commodity trading works.
Exactly. It's the structure. And so the SBTi landscape reflects the sector's current position. So these ABCD traders that I mentioned before, they, for example, they have SBTi aligned targets, but they don't have any flag SBTi targets as of today. And then the other three, so Olam, Wilmar, and Barry Callebaut, they do have SBTi and SBTi flag targets already.
Okay. So what you're saying is there are brands with huge influence and very polished sustainability reports, but they're dependent on ingredient suppliers who are not making any flag commitments at all.
Exactly. So you could say that the ambition runs downstream faster than the data flows upstream. But anyways, maybe back to the certified cacao. Sorry for hijacking your story. Why does it not move the scope 3?
Okay. So the only clean way to lower your scope 3 category 1 emission factor is if the supplier can demonstrate the product was produced in lower emissions, right? And that is captured in a verified emission factor. So a separate reforestation program running alongside your supply chain, that's what we call a removal claim, right? So you report it right next to your inventory, but not necessarily inside of it. So it doesn't reduce your scope 3 number.
Right. And what about all these different certifications that exist today?
Yeah. So the certifications such as the Rainforest Alliance, RSPO, Fair Trade, etc., they don't automatically change the scope 3 emission factors. A lower factor usually requires supply-specific quantified data, such as an LCA study for different products, which means that you enter in the premium-based differentiated factors. It's an emerging accounting practice that's tied to market instruments, where the supplier allocates the full emission reduction to the customers who did pay the premium. So you receive the same physical cacao as everyone else, but your factor is lower because they've assigned the entire sustainability benefit to the tons that you bought only.
Okay, and what happens then to the emission factor for the other customers who didn't buy the premium ingredient?
Yeah. Unfortunately, their factor goes up. So the total emissions in the system hasn't really changed, only the accounting. One buyer's reduction becomes another buyer's increase.
Okay, and is this allowed?
That's exactly what the GHG protocol is trying to answer right now. The current Scope 3 standard was published way back in 2011, so there's no formal guidance on market-based instruments. The rulebook is being written in real time right now, so some suppliers are already issuing differentiated factors and some buyers are already using them. And the rules that would make it credible don't even fully exist yet.
Okay, so today companies are making claims based on a methodology that isn't fully validated yet.
Yeah, some are, yes. And some are doing it carefully and really in good faith. But yes, the gap between what is being reported and what's being sanctioned is very real. And, just looking at these market instruments and what's happening, you do tend to think, is anyone actually trying to close this data gap properly?
Right. Maybe a good example that comes to mind here is Barry Callebaut.
Yeah.
As they're a bit further along than most of their competitors, I would say. So Barry Callebaut, they built a product carbon footprint calculator, which is aligned with the GHG protocol product standard. And it's freely accessible online on the website. And you just have to input your chocolate recipe, and then you get an emission estimate for your product. And so they fully transparently publish their methodology, which is great because it's already more than most ingredient suppliers do.
Yeah. So they publish their methodology. It's free, so anyone can just calculate their emissions for free. So it's like, what's the catch here? What am I missing?
Right. There is a catch. So the emission factors for Barry Callebaut are built from LCA databases, which means aggregated supply chain data. So again, we're sourcing from over 100,000 farmers across, for example, West Africa. So the farm level figure is by necessity an average. And so it's a carefully constructed average. It's most certainly better than the IPCC default, but it's still an average at the end of the day.
Yeah. So it's basically supplier specific data in its format, but it's actually secondary data in its substance.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. Okay.
Basically, yeah, Barry Callebaut is doing more than most. But yeah, we could say that this is the ceiling of what ingredient suppliers can currently do at this scale. Maybe also good to note is that the direction of travel is toward more rigor. So the GHG protocol published the land sector and removal standard this year, which will be effective from 2027 onwards. And maybe coming back to the initial conversation. So if certified cacao does not move your scope 3, what actually does? Are there any reduction levers?
Yes. So there are actually 3 actors in the market, as you can say it. So there's the farmers first. So regenerative practices, cover crops, reduced tillage, better soil management, etc. They reduce land-based emissions and can sequester carbon back into the soil, which is great. So precision nitrogen application can cut the N2O and is one of the largest sources in crop supply chains. And for livestock, certain feed additives actually reduce the methane from cattle by 20 to 30%. It's huge and it's real, all of these are real, but none of it scales if farmers carry the transition cost alone.
Right. So next to the farmers, I'm assuming that the commodity traders come in next.
Exactly. The commodity traders are actually they're the actual transmission mechanism, right? So they sit between millions of farmers and thousands of brands, and they're the only actors who can translate the downstream commitments into upstream action at scale. There are already small-scale examples of where farmers implement practices, reductions get verified, the climate benefits travels with the commodity. And the brands can actually use that number in their products, in their marketing, in everything, really.
Right. And maybe to add to that, so I think deforestation is also a very high impact lever that a trader has, right? So I think for cacao, palm, soil, this land use change is often the single largest emission source in its value chain. So yeah, I think if a trader can't demonstrate a no deforestation, then what happens downstream doesn't really matter so much.
Right. And then there's thousands of large, medium-sized, and small food brands with various leverage on commodity traders. It comes down to the money, the contracts, and asking the right questions, because farmers can't carry the transition costs alone. Brands that want verified reductions need to co-invest. You can't just request this data from someone and ask them to pay for it. And the question to ask your supplier is, explain me your methodology, not just your sustainability report. And if they can't do that, that means you found the gap.
Right. I mean, these changes don't exactly sound very fast. I think project development from an initial design to actual carbon reduction might take a few years. So yeah, the companies that haven't started supplier engagement are already running short of runway before the 2030 target milestone coming up, I think.
Yeah. So the certified sustainable cocoa doesn't move your scope 3, but a trader with verified farm level data, a chain of custody, and a differentiated emission factor, that will.